When you think about Sonic games released in 2006, you probably think about Sonic 06. Although some of you freaks out there may think about Sonic Rivals. However, neither of these games feature a 15th anniversary logo to signify the 2006 release. Only one game does, the true 15th anniversary title. Of course, we're talking about Sonic Riders, one of the coolest games in the series.
Sonic moves on along. We've had entire formulas that work, abandoned to try something new. We've had games like Sonic Chronicles, which teased a sequel that never came. But I think there was one series that was really onto something. It never quite reached its maximum quality, but the potential was always shining through. And you can see even more clever ways to expand with each entry, despite also losing something with each entry. They were primed to learn from everything they did and make the ultimate version, but then they stopped. So, let's take a look at every Sonic Riders game, the series that I think, with a tiny bit of work, could be among the best things Sonic has ever done. When Sega stepped out of the home console business, it felt like their Dreamcast tier software was still running for a bit. Crazy Taxi 3, Jet Set Radio Future, Panzer Dragoon Orta, Super Monkey Ball, Outrun 2. There was a sea of fantastic Sega games that felt like a continuation of the Golden Age, like their step down as a first party never happened. Except for Sonic. I think Sonic Heroes is a good game and Shadow the Hedgehog is a game, but there was definitely a fall from grace. If you hadn't discovered their Dreamcast games via the GameCube ports, then this generation for Sonic was really held up by the stellar compilations. We could play Sonic R on the PS2. PS5 wishes it could match this power. Sonic Advance definitely picked up the slack, but on consoles, I do believe the PS2 era, while mostly had a genuinely great Sonic game. One that matches that Dreamcast level of ambition, quality, and vibe. Man, the vibes are so on point. Everyone's wrong but me. Why did you give it a 2 out of 10, Computer Games Magazine? Only the sense of speed prevents total unplayability? I have zero idea what you mean by that. With accolades like this, you'd think Sonic Riders was a completely broken mess. I'm not entirely sure why there was such a harsh stance on this game. I mean, I fully agree it's not a game that you can just pick up and immediately master, but that's also extremely okay. There is a learning curve. Not a big one, but the payoff is worth it. It does sometimes feel like games are punished for breaking the norm, and that's honestly pretty sad. Sonic Riders isn't a kart racer, and it shouldn't really be compared to one. If any comparison's going to be made, I think F-Zero is the most apt. It's all about this meter over here, your air meter. Your board is always slowly eating up a little bit of air, but if you charge a jump, drift, or boost, that takes up an even bigger chunk. However, you can gain more air by pulling off and landing tricks, utilizing your character's ability, collecting air from capsules, or through one of the stick-twirly set pieces. This is probably the most dumb, but hey, look, it's a giant millipede! There's many opportunities to go quick and run that meter down, but there's an equal amount of opportunities to build it back up. Sonic Riders really is all about that bar, and once you understand that, there isn't really much more to learn. Like I said, it's just like F-Zero. In that game, the bar is your boost, but it's also your health, and if you run out of health, you go boom. Though you don't go boom in Sonic Riders, you start running on foot, which is honestly a huge penalty, and you never want this to happen. You know what else is from F-Zero? The jumping mechanic. If you hold down or up while jumping, you'll either go further or higher, just like in F-Zero. They really are very comparable. It's also in your interest to pick up rings whenever you can, as leveling up in a race increases your air meter, and by level 3, not only is there a ton of air, but you get a special character-specific boost as well. But you can level down, and if you fall off an edge, you're all the way back to level 1. So again, like F-Zero, don't fall, don't go boom, just do good. So, is it mechanical overload like some say? I honestly don't think it even comes close to that. You're racing, you're using your gauge, you're building it back up. Yeah, these set pieces are gimmicky, but the core moment-to-moment movement makes a lot of sense. Is it unplayable? No, it's actually incredibly straightforward and pretty damn responsive. Though in fairness of some critiques, there's basically no tutorial in this game. I mean, there is a video tucked away in the extra menu, but I've never seen that and I'm sure none of you have. But honestly, it's pretty easy just to learn through experience. There is mechanical depth here, but Riders isn't this scary, intimidating, complex game, and I think a lot more people would see that if they gave it just a little bit more time. Yeah, it's gonna take a few attempts to learn the limits of the air system, and having not played in a few years, I certainly had to restart a few times to understand how to grind on rails. You've got to press a jump again in the air. I'm not sure why no other Sonic game works like that, but that's what you've got to do. Otherwise, I'm really not sure where this extreme negativity comes from. Is it just an expectation or familiarity for a game that plays like other races? Maybe, but that's not what this is. Riders is fast, fun, has layers, and it's just really cool. We can make comparisons to F-Zero to make it somewhat easier to understand, but there really isn't a game that plays exactly like Sonic Riders. Future Sonic games like All-Stars Racing Transformed are a million times more accessible, more polished, and yeah, probably better, but it's also a genre we've all already played a billion times. That attitude in Riders is so unique and so extremely Sonic. I mean, Sonic's absolutely ridden boards before. We've pretty much had this exact style in the adventure games, complete with the timed jumps off ramps. In fact, more than any other game from this era, I feel like Sonic Riders is cut from the same cloth as Adventure 1 and 2. There's two stories running parallel like Adventure 2. The characterization, just the general tone, it all feels straight out of the Dreamcast. And let's just spend a moment talking about the aesthetic, because it is so good! The game takes place in this futuristic, gadget-punky city, and while it goes for this extreme style, it doesn't sacrifice its color and bold blue Sega skies. And yeah, the animated intro is absolutely incredible. Riders just feels like another proper Sonic game, and what I mean by that is it's made by Sonic Team. There's no compromise to the presentation with fully voiced and animated cutscenes. The soundtrack is as rocking as ever, if not more rocking. There's nothing budget feeling about the execution, even if the story is very dumb. Eggman is hosting a Grand Prix and says you can join him if you give him a Chaos Emerald, and Sonic goes, "Okay!" I do like the Babylon Rogues a lot though, even if Jet just sounds like the werewolf.
Alright, let's finish this! Then we'll finally get the treasure of Babylon! I need to find Eggman and make him fix this, and fast!
They really got a lot out of Jason Griffith, huh? Sonic, Shadow, Jet. The character you choose has a pretty drastic effect on how the race plays out, as just like Sonic Heroes, they're divided into speed, flight, and power types. All you really need to know is the speed ones can grind on rails, the flight ones can go off these ramps and fly through rings, and the power ones can punch obstacles out of the way, opening up some shortcuts. Though sometimes you can just follow the power one through their shortcut, which is pretty funny. It honestly feels like the tracks are prominently designed around the character the story puts you in. Like, yeah, tracks have paths for all three characters, but come on, no path in this track is anywhere near as fast as what Tails can do right here. Actually, flight is easily the best in a big chunk of the courses, and the story is very aware of that. And that's the biggest weakness of the first Sonic Riders. The character balance is barely even there, and while it is a lot of fun to experience tracks with different routes and different characters, it leaves any serious play with a lack of variety, as you'll probably choose the same track with the same character each time. Power tends to get the short end in most scenarios. I mean, there's a couple of tracks where it does favor power, but not very many of them. In the first level, you can smack past these cars here, which is safer and gives you more air, but it's not necessarily faster. I'd say power is done the dirtiest, then speed depending on the course, and then flight usually prevails. But still, I had a blast mastering all these tracks, and I'd find myself resetting races not because I had to. I mean, I could have easily still won these races if I kept going, but I actively wanted to. It's pretty addicting to try and get the perfect run. Just like classic Sonic games, these tracks are multi-layered, and if you can remember when to do a high jump or a long jump off these ramps to reach another layer, your dedication is absolutely rewarded. You can leave the CPU way behind. I think the CPU's having some trouble with this turn. It's a pretty tricky turn, but like, Jet, come on, man. Actually, the story mission just says beat Jet, which is a lie because he was stuck on this turn the entire race, and I lost to the egg pawns instead. And it still didn't count it. Come on, game, get your stuff together. I really like how drifting works in the first Riders. I mean, it's really no different to any racer like this. We get a sharp turn followed by a boost. But what I really like is, again, like F-Zero, using it for tilts rather than just full-on turns. You can really get a lot of precision out of that, but it does come at the cost of using some air. So again, there's a risk-reward to this precision. And the controls in general are just really precise. You'll probably have to get used to the drift, but once it clicks, you'll be really good at just gliding along, nailing turns, pulling off a bunch of tricks as you jump off a ramp. It's really good stuff. Especially love the trick system. I mean, you just tilt left and right or up and down depending on what direction you want to spin, but pulling off a bunch of different combos and successfully landing it and getting a bunch of air feels so good. It's risky though, because if you flub it up, you get no bonus at all. And there isn't really a big comeback item in this game. It's very skill-based. However, the leading player does leave behind a big trail of turbulence, and this not only automates your movement, but it makes you go a bit faster, and it builds your air. So that's kind of the comeback feature. However, it can be a little bit annoying as well. Like here, I want to grind on this rail, but the turbulence is actively stopping me. I just want to grind. Or here, where I can't really prepare to jump off the ramp because the turbulence stops just before the ramp. It's not a bad mechanic, but there's definitely stuff they could have ironed out in the sequels. And spoiler alert, they don't. Although in this track you can use the turbulence to clip through the top layer, and that's very funny. So, Sonic Riders 1, I absolutely adore. They didn't nail everything on their first try, but it's mechanically sound, extremely cool, and feels like a core 3D Sonic in many ways. It's definitely lacking any serious longevity. I mean, there's only 6 core tracks with some nighttime variants of those same tracks, which just about barely mix things up. And while there is more to master than your typical Mario Kart track, giving the small selection a bit more life, it still makes for a pretty short multiplayer night. But the story's a lot of fun, and it is worth it for how the final boss screams because it's very, very funny.
What?
They definitely try and draw more content out of the limited pool. I mean, there is a mission mode with 100 objectives, which are mostly all the same, repeating themselves constantly. After the first few, it's really not worth your time doing all of them. But doing all of them gives you Ai, Ulala, and Knights as playable characters. And there's also 2 really cool Sega stages. And there's a ton of unlockable gear, including a crazy taxi board that eats up rings rather than air. So this all sounds really cool. You've got to play for how long to unlock this robot? What to do, what to do. The Sega courses are easily the best in the game, a complete celebration of a ton of franchises squeezed into a single course. You'll race through a Billy Hatcher set, tear through Monkey Ball, go through a city complete with a crazy taxi arrow. It's so cool. I don't think the second Sega course is quite the same quality, but it's rad all the same, and I love the Choo Choo Rocket portion in particular. It's just rad as flips seeing my boy Ai doing flips on extreme gear. You go for it, Ai. There's a bunch of characters that weren't playable in the story too, like Shadow, Rouge, Cream, and Eggman, who switches voice actors on the fly.
No! I got it. Hooray! Ouch! You're no match for me! No!
It's also really neat to give Sonic the Chaos Emerald gear, because that gives you Super Sonic. And just like the Crazy Taxi board, this one eats up rings, so I don't know how long you'll actually stay as Super Sonic, but look, he is there. He is there. The first Sonic Riders has obvious areas for improvement, and it doesn't really lend itself to multiplayer unless the other person you're playing with is an experienced Sonic Riders fan. But you know, if the next game had online, you'll be racing exclusively against others who also know Sonic Riders. All they really had to do was take this foundation, polish it up a bit, give us more tracks, add online, and this would be one of Sonic's best overall games in my opinion. They added leaderboards. Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. I'm not the biggest fan of this one. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate this game, but it really wasn't what I wanted from a sequel. I personally feel a lot of the people giving criticism here were not the people the game was for. Those who love Sonic Riders, like me, love Sonic Riders, but Zero Gravity absolutely gave in to the complaints. It's extremely simple now, needlessly so. They took away the system where you charge your jumps and do tricks, and replaced it with a system where jumping at the edge of the ramp gives you a better score. It's extremely automated and in a ton of ways. The boost and drift are now outright gone, and replaced with the core twist of Zero Gravity being Zero Gravity. Instead of a normal quick turn, there's now something a bit more like Kirby Air Ride, where you come to a complete stop but get a big burst of momentum after nailing the turn. Only problem is it pretty much tells you exactly when to do this. It's an extremely forgiving system, and tracks are now mostly just these straight lines with these 90-degree turns that tell you exactly when to turn. And the boost is replaced with the gravity dive, which looks cool, but is so situational. You're meant to use this when the game tells you to use this, and that spawns all these bits of debris to bounce off, giving you more gravity power and keeping the dive going for longer. Now you can use it during other parts of the track, but the debris won't spawn, so you're pretty much just wasting it. And all this replaces the air system too, pretty much the whole point of Riders. If you completely deplete your gravity gauge, all that means is you can't do a dive, and when you do a drift, you don't get a boost afterwards. That's it. Of course you still want to have some meter, but the risk-reward is just sucked away. But to Zero Gravity's credit, it does do some good things as well. You now just need to jump on grind rails normally, and that's good. The general jump feels a lot better too. I mean, you can't charge it anymore, but you get a nice little fling. The menu presentation is way better too. Like, we went from this to something with actual graphic design. Very cool. And there's an actual tutorial system this time, and even Sonic Riders 1 veteran should probably check this out, as while Zero Gravity is simpler, there's still some new stuff to learn before just diving into a race. They've kept the tone mostly intact, and the music is so damn good! I love that there's some dynamic elements too, with these orchestral pieces picking up after a successful drift. Love that! Although back to the tone, the color palette is disappointingly quite muted. The first game had these extreme vibes without sacrificing its vibrancy, and it's a shame to see even the character models dial the hue way back in Zero Gravity. But it's still not cheaping out on the budget. There's even more involved CG cutscenes, animated story. This story isn't even about racing. So, there's these 5 rings called the Arc of the Cosmos, which is what makes the hoverboards do this. Turns out these have something to do with the floating ruins from the previous game, which is actually a spaceship. Jet and his crew are descendants of aliens. Okay. It's a pretty fun story with much higher stakes, but it's still very much on the dumb side. Although making it not about racing makes it contextually quite confusing. Like in this scene, Amy is running away from Storm. Alright, we gotta get away! They're literally standing right next to each other. You often end up racing robots rather than any Sonic character, and that's pretty bland. And man, the AI cheats! Zero Gravity evolves the leveling system in a strange way. It no longer increases the size of your meter, but instead evolves the skill of your racer. And you can choose to either boost your speed, your gravity gauge, and, this is pretty crucial, unlock your character's ability. So Sonic can't grind rails until you collect enough rings that unlocks that power. They make it easy enough by scattering rings absolutely everywhere, but it does feel a bit restrictive, and the AI doesn't care. The race has just started, there's no way you can fly yet. How are you breaking that wall? Mighty Knuckles needs 40 rings to punch, and you're telling me you can punch right away? People can't punch without money, robots! But even with the cheating AI, this game is an absolute cakewalk. The first game presented some pretty challenging tracks with quite a bit to learn and master, but I was clearing Zero Gravity's courses on my first try, and by a significant margin too. It's a shame it's so easy, as there's some pretty cool track designs in here. I love the idea of this water slide one. This isn't easy to learn yet hard to master, it's just kinda easy. There are a few mechanical layers, like using your gravity abilities in the air, and you can use this to get to different layers of the track, and that's really cool, but once you figure it out, it's also really easy. The one thing that had me stumped though was, like, how the heck do you use these springs? And you want to know how? Do you jump on them? No. Do you do a gravity drift into them? No. You need to be pretty far back, pick up a very specific item that makes you run, and just hope that happens in the radius of one of these springs, because that's how you use them. I never got it to happen, but that's what these are for. I don't want it to sound like I hate the game, because I had a decent time playing through the story, but it's just so underwhelming in the long term. Riders 1 may have been pretty light on tracks, but I still come back to play it every now and then 17 years later. With Zero Gravity, outside of this video, I've had no urge to play it since it came out. There's small things in here that would benefit the first Sonic Riders, but it wasn't worth gutting its mechanical complexities. And where the flip is I? This time the Sega crossovers are Billy Hatcher, Amigo, and Knights. I guess you're allowed to make the cut. Huh, Knights? Where's my monkey boy? I mean, I guess it's cool having a mostly new pool, but Ai's a stronger monkey than Amigo, that's all I'm saying. The Sega theme tracks are less about diving through a Sega world and more about cruising down a Sega arcade district. They're still some of the better tracks in the game, but this isn't the same. Now, Zero Gravity does cut out the gimmicky sections from the first game, and I know that couldn't have been easy. We're on the Wii now, the primary input is made for gimmicks. They must have been itching to bring these back, but good on them. Good on them. For all its compromises, Zero Gravity scored 1 point higher than the original. I really don't know about this one. There's less to master, it ends up being radically shorter to finish the story, and while the gravity stuff may look cool, I just don't think it's a fun replacement to what was already there and worked so well. At least it doesn't force Wii controls on you. You can play with a GameCube controller, but not a classic controller for some ungodly reason. I fully recognize it's not bad. Many people really like it in fact, but I don't know. This is one of my greatest disappointments. Riders 1 was so close to being exactly what I wanted, and this just turns in a very different direction. Why do you do this to me, Sega? Sonic Free Riders, the first HD game in the series. The first game with actual online play in the series. They ditched almost all of Zero Gravity's ideas and have pretty much gone back to basics. Heck, there's even a massive gameplay improvement, where characters don't have specific abilities, but instead, going into a race, you equip them with 2. So for instance, I can give Sonic the ability to grind rails, and also to fly. Or you can ignore those abilities entirely and put on perks like more airtime or better starting boost. All those issues that Riders 1's tracks had prioritizing a single character ability would have been completely resolved with this idea. Tracks would be way more replayable. It's no longer a matter of choosing the rails or the flight or the punching. You can mix and match them now. This genuinely brings the series forward and brings more mechanical depth. You still can't do absolutely everything, and if you choose perks instead, then you're locking yourself off a bunch of other features, but there's such a cool risk-reward factor here. How long's that thing been on screen for? Sonic FreeRiders was a Kinect launch title, and until very, very recently, we've not been able to play this thing with anything but this big old camera. But before we get into the new stuff, let's address how most people played this game. First off, I will defend the menus. These get a bunch of flack, and I'm not entirely sure why. Look, you just go whoop, whoop, whoop. This is fine. It's moving, that's the problem. It's not even that the gestures are complicated. You're always moving forward, and all you really have to do is tilt to move, kick off to do a boost, and jump off ramps. That's the basics. But shifting left and right feels really unresponsive. And it took me a bit to understand that I was doing the kick to boost wrong. You're meant to go from your tilted stance to facing forward to do a kick, but I was trying to kick while on my normal stance and it wasn't working, so this actually does work fine when you understand how to do it. But also, you can't tilt while doing this, so if you're boosting, you can't really turn. You also lean to pick up rings, you wipe off steam, and honestly, this stuff isn't too bad. But the little gimmick sections from Riders 1 make a return. They couldn't resist with a camera this time, so prepare to wave your arms around like a maniac. The one thing I really do like is to change the element of your board. Like let's say you're on grind and you want to change to flying. You just flip the way you're facing, and that's really responsive and it works very well. It all pretty much works, it just doesn't work well enough. There were so many times where I was bumping into the side because my turn just wasn't getting picked up enough. All the gesture stuff is mostly fine, but when the core turns are this clumsy, it's just not fun enough. There's clearly a somewhat good game in here, but it doesn't matter if you can barely play it. Where's that guy from Metacritic? Oh, there he is. Only the sense of speed prevents total unplayability. I agree with him now, he's right! Despite the jump to high definition, it's clearly a much cheaper game. Story mode is told through these completely static character portraits, but by the way, this was the first game to debut the brand new voice cast. It beat Sonic Colors to market by a week, and while I didn't pick up FreeRiders straight away, I remember watching these story bits on YouTube just to hear how all the characters sound. And we hear way more of characters like Shadow than we ever have since. But what is going on with some of these rosters? Like, it's cool to have a Riders story that isn't just Team Sonic and the Babylon Rogues, but why is Team Rose, Amy, Cream, and prepare yourself, Vector? Is Big okay? Team Dark just turned up with Shadow and Rouge, but because the rules say you need a team of 3, they recruit a random robot who sounds exactly like Omega.
Are you addressing me? I was just heading over to...
Turns out the robot was secretly studying everyone because he's really Metal Sonic in disguise. What does he want to do? End the world? Rule the world? No, he just wants to be good at skateboarding. This might be the best story, actually. Though progression itself is partially good too. It's more like a set of missions than just race, race, race. So for those who don't understand how to play Sonic Riders, this would have taught you. It's a pretty good tutorial. It is a bit dull that each of them have the exact same formula. You basically have 9 different missions, which can be things like do a 1-lap race, or go through these hoops, or just normal tutorial stuff. And then the last one is always a 3-lap race, so you essentially only really have one proper race per chapter. There should be a balance between no tutorials and no races, and no game in this series has got it down. There's also no Sega stages or characters this time, although you can use up one of your element slots and replace it with music from a prior game. So you can say, I only want to use one element, I just want flying, but I also want it to sound just like this. It's the kind of flex I respect. I don't get it. There's clearly thought put into FreeRiders. There's excellent evolutions, but when it's so unresponsive, none of that matters. So, let's try the brand new Kinect Free patch. What the absolute balls! You would never expect a game made to be controlled with your body to translate so well to a controller, but FreeRiders feels exactly like the other games. A little bit more twitchy, sure, but god, this works really well. X to boost, shoulder buttons to punch. It's all really simple. Even the full body leaning stuff is just mapped to the right analog stick. I'm actually pretty concerned they didn't do this officially. It's so simple. Even the menus are now mapped to the D-pad. Even as a menu defender, I'm ecstatic about this. Sonic Freeriders is not the absolute mess it appears to be. In fact, it's outright good. Obviously, it was designed around the Kinect, so turns are pretty simple, courses are wide with lots of straight lanes, but it doesn't ruin it. Freeriders, especially with its closer camera angle, feels like something you'd find in the arcade, like Mario Kart GP. It's got a few off-kilter items as well, which the series wasn't really known for. I wouldn't love them in the core game, but they're fine enough here. It's bewildering. It feels like they knew exactly what I didn't like about Zero Gravity, scrapped the bulk of it, and went back to the exact game that I wanted, only to make it with this controller. And it works perfectly fine without it. Even the vivid Sega skies are back, no more drab Zero Gravity look. Yeah, they bring back the gimmicky stuff, but with a controller, you just hold down the X button and it just goes through it itself. Just like Zero Gravity, there's no penalty for running out of air, but god, I don't want to be running with the Kinect. Again, it's fine in this context. And man, you really can get a ton of speed in this one. Like, granted, it's quite automated in areas, but this feels exhilarating, especially with the camera this close. Even with the controller patch, it's not incredible, but it shows signs of wanting to learn. Sega could have so easily done a fourth game combining all the good stuff from this trilogy, but Freeriders was how it ended, and it's taken me 13 years to realize how much good it was actually doing. An HD, online Sonic Riders that mechanically evolved, and in many ways returned to what I loved about the original, but unnecessarily hindered by the most unresponsive movement in a Sonic game. And that's not to discourage Kinect, this can work, it just doesn't really here. Would you believe no one's playing online? Also, Xenoblade Chronicles X is lurking within the soundtrack. I don't care what anyone says, the Sonic Riders trilogy is one of the coolest things Sonic has ever done. Only a comment from Timmy204060405 could change my opinion, but that's not going to happen. There's no way he would disparage this game because I know he's the biggest fan of them all. So Timmy, don't leave that comment. If you also love Sonic Riders, let us know down below. Was I too harsh on Zero Gravity? Was I too accepting of Freeriders? Do I love the original too much? Am I an idiot? Tell me many things, just insult me. Thanks for watching everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for watching until the end. This was a really fun series to revisit, and I hope it inspires some of you guys to return to Sonic Riders as well. Thank you to our beautiful patrons for making this video possible, and we will see you next time. Bye everyone.